Extracts from a new book which describes the White House as a crazy town hit the headlines, followed by an editorial talking of a resistance inside the White House. Just how messed up are things around U.S. President Donald Trump? And the DPRK leader Kim Jong Un mentioned for the first time a timeline to denuclearize the peninsula with a precondition. Can the U.S. and DPRK meet each other halfway under the brokerage of PRK? Welcome to The Point, live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. An anonymous senior official working for U.S. President Donald Trump's administration has written an opinion piece that was published online by the New York Times, blasting the president's amorality, criticizing him for his impetuous leadership style, and depicts what it calls a two-track presidency in which Trump acts according to his own whims, while many of his top aides work to thwart his more misguided impulses until he is out of office. While slamming Trump for his inadequacies and volatility, the piece also declared him a danger to the country. We believe our first duty is to this country, and the president continues to act in a manner that is detrimental to the health of our republic, wrote the unnamed author. Trump, in reaction, said the New York Times should never have done that because really what they have done is virtually treason. The extraordinary column surfaced one day after the first excerpts emerged from a new book by Bob Woodward, in which Trump's top advisors painted a devastating portrait of the president and described a crazy town atmosphere inside the White House. Just how damaging for the presidency is this new piece in the New York Times, and what are the likely consequences of such open criticisms becoming the main topic of conversation in White House circles? Joining me from New York is Professor Ian Reifowitz from the Sunny Empire State College, and here in the Beijing studio, Einar Tangen, a current affairs commentator. Let me go to Einar first. What is surprising about this book and this editorial? Because basically, since the beginning of last year, when President Trump came into office, these are our observations, right? He is never consistent. He says one thing, a day later he has something else, and then he does one thing different from what he says, and his policies seem to come out of no rationality. What does this revelation say, other than vindicating all these claims that we have been trying to make?
Well, this is really the first time that the enemy has suddenly revealed itself as around him. Previously, you know, the Democratic Party was the enemy. Anyone he didn't like was his enemy, even people within the Republican Party. But now, all of a sudden, he is surrounded by enemies within the White House itself. And it's quite clear that, you know, you can't take Bob Woodward's book and say, oh, there's only one deep throat. This is not like Watergate, where you had one unnamed individual giving information. This, you have a host. He has hundreds of hours of tape recordings and interviews. He has documentation. And then with this, this latest revelation, this op-ed piece, it makes it very clear that this is a turning point for Donald Trump, that he is surrounded by people who believe that he is not competent.
Well, talking about the Republicans, they have been supporting, they've been standing by the president, basically whatever he does. And now we know that many of his top aides who are Republicans are actually working exactly against him to hold him back. What does that say about the true feelings many Republicans actually have about him?
Well, there is not a lot of love lost over Donald Trump within the Beltway, but you have to remember the polling numbers. I mean, the overwhelming 80 to 90%, depending on what issue you're talking about, believes, if they're Republicans, believes that Donald Trump is the savior they've been looking for. They think he's doing a terrific job. So for any Republican politician to say, look, I'm going to go against the president, he's in essence courting his own election. So all of them are very cognizant that they're running in front of him scared, but at the same time it's very clear that they do not believe that he is the man who should be leading not only the country, but not the party either.
Well, the question many people are asking in the United States, in Washington, D.C., is who wrote this editorial. I mean, let's gossip a little bit. Who do you think might have done it?
I like the idea of Pence doing it because it has this shadow effect. It's the House of Cards kind of thing. The vice president in waiting is somehow sabotaged.
His office was one of the first to come out to deny it.
Well, of course. I mean, if you're writing anonymously, of course you're going to deny it. I'm not saying that it is him. There have been some studies linguistically of the way the writing style is and wording that was used that was traced back to him. Unique phrases, the fact that there's only about 17 to 19 syllables. It's very similar to his style of writing or to his speechwriter style of writing. Now, this is a senior official. It's not his speechwriter. So the question is, who did this? It's going to be who done it for quite some time.
Yeah.
But if you look at motive, if this was a crime drama, you always look for who would have a motive for getting rid of the president, and certainly the vice president.
The vice president. Well, he definitely denied it, and his denial was followed by a host of senior administration officials, right? The Director of National Intelligence, Defense Secretary, Secretary of State, Treasury Secretary, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, so on and so forth. And you also mentioned Deep Throat, which is the undercover FBI staff who kind of brought down Richard Nixon back in the 1970s. So whoever wrote this piece, is this going to be a game changer for President Trump?
Well, I think it is. Psychologically now he's completely isolated. When he goes into his room to watch CNN, basically he's with all of his friends. Washington is famous for, if you want a friend, get a dog. I suggest that he consider that, because right now he doesn't know who to trust. I mean, literally, it's like the cookie jar is on the floor, the cookies are all over the place, and he's looking at everybody and who did this, and everyone's saying, I don't know, not me.
And there were talks about the first daughter, Ivanka Trump, or the first lady, right? That
would not be credible.
That would not, but you know, all kinds of gossip. Anyway, let's listen to this soundbite. I want to play this soundbite, which was what President Trump said on Thursday in retaliation, in refuting the media, of course. Let's listen in.
And someday when I'm not president, which hopefully will be in about 6.5 years from now, the New York Times and CNN and all of these phony media outlets will be out of business, folks. They'll be out of business.
Well, Einar, do you think this is some kind of attempt by the liberal media, first the Washington Post and then the New York Times, to come out and get President Trump?
Well, that's a wonderful talking point, but the fact is, all the material is coming from within the White House. So how is it that the liberal press is putting words, documents, hours of tape into the mouths of senior administration officials? It doesn't work. Bob Woodward is one of the most respected journalists. He was the one who, Woodward and Bernstein were the ones who brought down President Nixon through their tenacious reporting. No one has ever said, even Donald Trump, when he talked to Woodward and complained, saying, oh yes, why didn't you call me about this? And Woodward finally got him to admit that, yes, you had been told. I had been trying to get a hold of you. Right. And he says, I know you're very fair. I mean, the fact is, he's a respected institution. He has a solid case. And this is not something that Donald Trump, and to imagine yourself as Donald Trump going back into the White House and looking around you for not just one, it's not just the op-ed person he's looking for. Right. He's looking for the probably 10, 20, 30 people who have basically given information about his White House dealings.
Well, in Chinese, we have a term for this kind of people, 内鬼, which means insider ghost, somebody who hides within some kind of a cabinet and you will never find out, or is very difficult to find out. How haunted is this place called White House, and what are the consequences for policy making, especially diplomacy? Well,
you know, let's take a look at all the things that we're not discussing. The fact that his personal lawyer is, you know, under indictment, that his finance person for his private business has been given immunity and will have to testify. And if he does not testify truthfully, he could go to jail. So there are so many things that are going on that are so negative for Trump. He doesn't know who to turn to. All his close confidants, except perhaps his immediate family, are basically, he doesn't know who to trust.
Well, and what we're also talking about is a two-track presidency, which was a very important phrase from the op-ed. In terms of dealing with other countries, you know, foreign policy when it comes to dealing with China, the trade war, when it comes to dealing with its allies, trade war, when it comes to dealing with the DPRK, you know, the craziness has consequences across the world. Would you say so?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you start looking at the stock markets around the world, a number of developing countries which are experiencing severe problems because of what Donald Trump has done, he's driving the dollar to new highs. This is against the U.S. interest. Our exports become more expensive. You add tariffs on that, they become even more expensive. It drives up the dollar because they start raising the interest rates. And what do you see? You see Argentina, South Africa, there's a cascade across these. All these countries had dollar-denominated debt. And now they're faced with situations where their currencies have halved in value, which means that their payments have doubled. And they don't have the hard currency to do that. So he was uniquely unprepared to be president. He wasn't a student of history. He doesn't like to read. He wasn't really up on international politics.
Yeah. And yet the people who support him continue to support him, and probably even more. By the way, he was elected, right, despite all of the things that you said that wouldn't qualify. He was elected legitimately, you must say, and now it seems that the people who support him in the Rust Belt and the agricultural belt, they continue to support even more. Would you say
No,
would you say
actually,
that will be the case in the future?
The latest polls show them that he had been on an upward trajectory when he was attacking China in his trade war, but since the situation with the immigrants separating the children from their parents, and all of these revelations about criminality or potential criminality or links to Russia, and now these things, he's on a downward spiral. He's heading back down to his 32% core that's there. But even they may not be so hardcore. I mean, if in fact people believe that he called Sessions a dumb Southerner, I lived in the South. This is one of the things that Southerners just really hate about Northerners. I mean, there is this North-South divide. The idea that you call me dumb, this is a stereotype. And this kind of thing can reach deep into the guts of people who aren't really concerned about international things. They're concerned about domestic issues.
Is that why President Trump seems to be panicking about the possibility of being impeached? Because on various occasions he has been telling his supporters, it will be your fault if I get impeached, or he says, you didn't go out to vote, that's the only way it could happen, or he has said that I will be the only president in history. They'll say, what a job he's done, by the way, we are impeaching him. He has mentioned the word impeachment multiple times just recently.
Yeah, well, he also mentioned before that, you know, collusion, I didn't collude. By the way, collusion is not a crime.
No, but the fact that he's mentioning the possibility of being impeached here and stoking fear about it.
It's highly unlikely. He's stoking fear, yes, because that's part of what he does. But the fact is, an impeachment is just an accusation. It would have to go to the Senate, and 2/3 of the senators would have to vote to convict him. They would have a trial.
They were talking about this provision 25 of the Constitution.
That's different.
To remove him from office because all the cabinet members think he's unfit for office.
A majority of the cabinet members and the vice president.
Yeah. How likely is that, very briefly?
Not likely, because once again you have this problem, the Republican base backing him. You would have civil war within the Republican Party.
Okay, thank you very much, Einar Tangen, current affairs commentator. And we'll take a very short break, and when we come back, we'll be hearing about how South Korea tries to break the impasse on the DPRK's nuclear issue. Stay with us. The leader of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or DPRK, has mentioned the first timeline ever about denuclearization. DPRK leader Kim Jong Un said he hopes to achieve denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula by the end of President Trump's first term, meaning, if nothing goes wrong, January 2021. He made the announcement while meeting envoys from the ROK president on Thursday. President Trump has responded with appreciation. Meanwhile, leaders from the DPRK and ROK have just confirmed they will hold the third summit of this year in Pyongyang from September the 18th to the 20th. Now, since the Kim-Trump-Singapore summit in June, little progress has been made on the issue, and President Trump cancelled his Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's trip to Pyongyang late August. What has held up the DPRK-US talks, and how will ROK President Moon Jae-in help help broker a possible deal between the two sides, while itself being a stakeholder. Joining me in the studio is Dr. Zhao Tong, fellow at the Carnegie-Tsinghua Center for Global Policy, and from Washington, D.C., Soojin Park, public policy fellow at Wilson Center and formerly deputy spokesperson for the Ministry of Unification in the ROK government. Welcome to both of you. Now, Dr. Zhao, it has been almost 3 months since the Kim-Trump meeting in Singapore, and according to the document that was reached at the end of the summit, the U.S. will provide unspecified security guarantees to the DPRK in exchange for unwavering commitment from the DPRK to completely denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. Why has there been no progress so far?
Well, from the North Korean perspective, the U.S. has done very little to respond to North Korean unilateral concessions. U.S. so far has only committed to suspend the joint exercises with South Korea. On the North Korean side, North Korea has taken a few steps, including shutting down the nuclear test site, tearing down part of the important satellite and missile launch facility, and returning remains of American soldiers, returning U.S. hostages, etc. So their expectations are very different. Their measurement of the progress of unilateral concessions are also very different.
Now, to further implement the agreement reached in Singapore, the DPRK has said the U.S. needs to reciprocate its gestures of goodwill, including the things that Dr. Zhao just mentioned, which means the country has for instance, by dismantling the nuclear testing site and the missile facility, the country has put nuclear and long-range missile testing on hold for good, and the outside world should recognize such goodwill and reciprocate. So, Ms. Park, why is the U.S. reluctant to give what the DPRK wants, which is to declare that the Korean War officially ends?
Well, there appears to be two major reasons why Washington is reluctant to declare a peace or the end of the war, Korean War. First of all, Washington is concerned that by prematurely ending the Korean War or declaring peace, North Korea will not follow up on its end of the deal, and Washington may lose the incentive that is very important to keep North Korea implementing the necessary steps. Secondly, another concern Washington has is that once the declaration is made, North Korea may push for Washington to withdraw U.S. troop presence on the Korean Peninsula, citing that there is no need for such troop presence. And that will eliminate a lot of, that will actually complicate a lot of ROK-U.S. alliance issues, as well as the Washington's options in dealing with North Korea. So for those two main reasons, Washington was seems to be very reluctant to go ahead.
Yeah. However, it is kind of believed by some analysts that the U.S. can actually make some compromise there. Dr. Zhao, do you agree with such an argument? And if so, what kind of room of maneuver does the U.S. have here?
Well, I think there is certainly room for further actions on the American part. I think to have a joint declaration of the end of a war is a very important confidence building measure. It can provide security to North Korea, making North Korea feel safer and be less paranoid. And also, there are many conventional military level confidence building measures the United States can entertain. With the nuclear capability, North Korea, I think, is interested in pursuing a reduction of conventional military presence near the border with South Korea. And there are many experiences they can use from the European sector when such conventional confidence building measures have been in place in recent decades. And also, I think U.S., if it is now willing to make further progress on the military front, it can take measures such as inviting North Korean cultural groups to visit, to have musical performance in the United States. Those are not related to the sensitive nuclear issue, but it can be perceived in Pyongyang as a goodwill gesture from the United States that respects North Korea and treats North Korea as an equal partner.
The DPRK leader Kim Jong Un also mentioned a timeline, which is by the end of the first term of U.S. President Donald Trump. Ms. Park, how reasonable do you think, or how achievable is this timeline? Because we have just over 2 years left.
Well, based on the technical issues, it may be it may take longer to completely denuclearize all these facilities and its capabilities, because that would take years and years. But what I think can be achieved is a political kind of agreement and affirmation of their willingness to go this path between the two sides. So if the two sides can agree on the quid pro quo, namely what to give and what to get on this denuclearization path, I think that side can be actually achieved, and that can be worked on.
Well, September the 9th will mark the 70th anniversary of the founding of the DPRK, and many are watching the planned parade that will be happening in Pyongyang. Especially people are saying they will be watching out whether Pyongyang will be displaying its intercontinental missiles to gauge the kind of message or the level of willingness for it to hold its nuclear program. Dr. Zhao, is that what we should be looking out for as well?
I think everyone will be looking at whether North Korea will show off its the most provocative military assets during this parade, especially the long-range missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and the missile launch vehicles. I think it would be unwise, extremely unwise for North Korea to do that, because North Korea has a strategic interest in continuing this effort to improve bilateral relationship with the United States, and rolling out those provocative military assets will send the wrong signal to Washington and can further prolong the current stalemate in the negotiations. But if North Korea does that, that means I think it's primarily a domestic signal to the North Korean domestic audience, because North Korea has long said that their nuclear weapons are the treasured sword of their national survival. So not rolling out those missiles would confuse the general public why we shouldn't showcase our missiles that make us most proud of.
Well, let's wait and see what will happen on that day. Let's take a look at the role of the South Korean President Moon Jae-in. Now, Kim actually got a message passed on by Moon Jae-in's envoys, and he also sent a message to U.S. President Donald Trump, and Kim also expressed faith in President Trump's efforts to settle the nuclear impasse, and Trump has also said that we can get it done together, and they have to be brokered by Moon Jae-in. So, Ms. Park, what can President Moon do as some small steps to bring the two sides closer?
Well, first of all, it's a good sign that the two leaders in the U.S. and DPRK are still in good terms, despite some lull or the deadlock in terms of the denuclearization process. Based on this good relations that these two leaders have, President Moon needs to move the traction so that the leaders have the means or the circumstances to actually implement what they believe is necessary. That meaning, in Washington, there is a widespread skepticism that North Korea is not sincere and will not denuclearize, which makes it all the more difficult for President Trump to move ahead. So Seoul will need to come to Washington and will be coming in September for the UN Assembly. So President Moon will need to engage President Trump more based on the messages that he received through his special delegation, which have not been made public, which not have all been made public. And also in his upcoming inter-Korean summit with Chairman Kim Jong Un, President Moon will also need to make sure that the North Korean leader sees the importance of making tangible steps to make the international community and the U.S. see that it is sincere.
Yeah. Dr. Zhao, what kind of progress on bilateral front can the DPRK and ROK make during their third meeting of this year?
I think there is a lot of potential for progress for further improving inter-Korean relationship. They can discuss a wide range of issues to work on further with the reunion of family members. They can do that again and make it ongoing and continuous process. They can enlarge their efforts to conduct cultural or sports exchanges, science and technology cooperation, agriculture cooperation, etc. But I think they are limited. Their hands are tied in terms of pushing forward on denuclearization. Recently, the U.S. has been very unhappy about South Korea being too aggressive in approaching North Korea on that issue, and U.S. has made efforts to actually undermine South Korean effort. For example, they stopped South Korean to conduct a joint survey of the inter-Korean railroad last month, and they also made efforts to prevent the South Korean to continue having a high-level discussion, setting up the leader office, for example.
Yeah, at this moment, I have very limited time left. Let me still go to Dr. Zhao. At this moment, what kind of role can China play? We know Chinese President Xi Jinping is said to visit the DPRK within this year. What kind of role can China play here?
I think, first of all, China needs to make effort to eliminate the misunderstandings in some part of the international community. President Trump, for example, openly criticized China for demanding North Korea to slow down its cooperation in the denuclearization negotiation, which is totally untrue. I think it simply doesn't make sense. So making sure that everyone understands that China wants quick denuclearization, that's the basis for international cooperation. And secondly, I think the reason why the U.S. and others have been reluctant to make concessions to North Korea is that they do not fully appreciate the unilateral concessions North Korea has made so far. And the reason for that is
so China can do what? In
China
one
can help design a technical verification mechanism to make sure any future North Korean efforts can be verified by external players.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Dr. Zhao Tong, Fellow at the Carnegie-Tsinghua Center for Global Policy, and Soojin Park, a Public Policy Fellow at the Wilson Center and former Deputy Spokesperson for the Ministry of Unification in the South Korean government. And that's it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.